Welcome to Recovery TV Live. This is the very first episode of 2022. We're going to talk to you guys today in this episode about this new Apple TV show called The Shrink Next Door, which is based on a true story and starring Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd on Apple TV. And so we're going to get to that. Don't go anywhere. So we're going to talk about this episode, this series called The Shrink Next Door. And you and I have talked at length about this, which is why I was like, this should be our first episode of 2022.
Sure.
Because there's a lot of disturbing elements to it. There's a lot of disturbing elements just on how this person was treated, because it's based on a true story, but just also on the potential message that it might send about mental health to the world. But also just a lot of things just that'll get your wheels turning. Before we show you guys the video clip, what was your impression of the few episodes that you watched? 'Cause, I think it's important to say that Carrie only made it like 3 episodes in.
Yeah, like 3 or 4, yeah.
Tell us why you only made it 3 or 4.
Well, first I started watching it because I love both of those actors, and it was about therapy, so some interest. But the portrayal of the relationship between the therapist and the client was so exploitive that I was physically uncomfortable. The few episodes that I watched would always take me to the edge of my seat, bending over and like doubling over almost in pain watching it. It really surprised me how strongly I reacted to it, which is why we started talking about it.
Right.
Because it was a discussion about the overall presentation of the relationship between client and therapist in the media. And I wouldn't say I have a lot of examples of healthy relationships portrayed in the media, but this one in particular just made me feel rotten. It made me feel so sick and uncomfortable that I just decided I couldn't finish watching it.
Right. It was definitely disturbing. I felt all those same things, except it's one of those things like when you're eating like a certain type of candy that's like, it doesn't really taste real good, but you just can't stop. You got to finish it, you know? On that front, though, Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd did an excellent job. I mean, it really is a well-produced series, and the storyline is amazing. It's truly disturbing because it's based on a true story that spanned over almost 30 years.
That's crazy.
And that part of it right there is what really got my stomach turning, you know. And I don't want to give too many spoiler alerts because we're going to show a clip in just a minute. But as I kept watching the series and he kept getting older and older and older, I finally looked it up before the series was over. Like, how long did this go on? And it was like 27 years or 29 years or something. And it's just ridiculous. And so we're going to show you guys a clip, and then we will kind of respond to it with our reaction, and then of course if anybody watching wants to comment about their reaction to it, you're welcome to do that. And then we're going to cover a few different things that we could talk for hours on this, but we're going to try to just hit on a few different things related to just not all, but a few of the big ethical violations that are happening here. There are multiple, but we're just going to cover a few. And then also we want to share with you about the reality that probably most therapists aren't like this, but there are some things you can do to assess for yourself if something is awry with the person that you're seeing. So, all right, so we will go ahead and show you the video clip. So stand by.
It's my idea to host these parties, right? Yeah. I come up with the themes, I write the invitations. I am the host. You are. People come to enjoy themselves, to have fun and relax, not be confronted by your pathologies. I'm sorry. I mean, what's the big deal?
Okay, so what was your reaction to that?
I was thinking that my thought was we should just show that clip when we talk about gaslighting and covert abuse.
Right.
But what I was feeling was disgusted, heartbroken.
It's just, let me tell you something that really I think probably bothered me the most about it. And I don't know if Paul Rudd had coaching from a mental health professional. I'm sure that he did. But he uses these joining tactics, what we call joining techniques. And so as therapists, we are trained to know where to go mentally to let the client know that we hear them and we get them, as much as we can. And that in turn, over time, starts to build trust in the therapist-client relationship, right? And he's using some of those techniques to do that, but he very clearly, as you see throughout the show, he uses those for his own benefit primarily. The other thing too is I think he really does care about Will Ferrell, but secondary
to his own
interests, right?
Yeah.
And so that part of it is troublesome because I'm like, sometimes he's in these therapy sessions, I'm hearing him talking, and I'm like, he sounds like a well-trained therapist. And then he starts throwing in those nuggets of like, you don't want to do this, do you? You don't want to do that. And, and it's all about his own personal gain, couching it in his care and concern for the client, So
Right.
let's talk about some of these.
Okay, the ethical
Some of these ethical
considerations.
things, yeah. So probably most of you know that in any professional organization, there's an ethical code that we go by.
Right.
We're going to reflect on the code for marriage and family therapists. That's the particular licensure that Carrie and I are licensed under. But different licensures have their own, but they're usually very similar in scope, and so they usually cover the same things, and they're just worded a little differently sometimes. So we're going to look at a few of the codes from the AAMFT, which is our who puts out our code of ethics.
Right.
And look at kind of what's happening here in this situation.
And I think it's important to say that professional organizations have codes of ethics in order to protect the vulnerable, the client. They are not codes of ethics to protect the therapist.
Right.
And so I think it's really important to make sure that as you hear us talk about those codes, you can see the violations happening and how that is negatively impacting the character that Will Ferrell is playing.
Right.
Yep.
So let's talk about this first one that I think is probably the most obvious one in the series, is this code that has to do with what is called multiple relationships. And so it just says that marriage and family therapists are aware of their influential position with respect to clients, and they avoid exploiting the trust and dependency of such persons. Therapists therefore make every effort to avoid conditions in multiple relationships with clients that could impair professional judgment or increase risk of exploitation. Such relationships include, but are not limited to, business or close personal relationships with clients or the client's immediate family. When the risk of impairment of exploitation exists due to conditions of multiple roles, therapists document the appropriate precautions taken. Okay. So that's that last part's kind of reflecting on, like, if you're a therapist in a small town, you might go to church with some of the people that you see.
They may be your kid's teacher, or your car dealer, or whatever.
Right. And that has to be documented because there are some unique circumstances. Like for us, we're in a big city, we can avoid that for the most part. Right. But in this series, and like I said, I don't want to give too many spoiler alerts. You can clearly tell through that conversation that there was some kind of party that Paul Rudd, the therapist, was upset about that the client spoiled, so he was
at the party
himself.
It also seemed like they had hosted it together because they were discussing who did what for it.
Yeah.
So a social event, presenting themselves to the world in some kind of relationship that's not therapist-client is explicitly a violation of avoiding multiple relationships.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you go watch the series, you'll be shocked on where that party was actually held. But another piece of it too is that it wasn't revealed in the clip is that this therapist also ended up working for the client at his business as a consultant, working kind of more like industrial psychology
Right, right.
type stuff, And so again, it's a conflict of interest. You can't operate in those multiple roles like that. You can't be a friend and go hang out and go to
Right.
barbecues and
Right.
parties, and then come back into the therapy room and do therapy.
Right. And the point of it is that you need to have clear boundaries. This statute is there because part of mental health is about having boundaries, and we don't want a client to feel confused. What role are we playing here? Are you my therapist? Are you my friend? Are you my
Right.
boss? Are you my coworker? Whatever. It's just not clear, and that's not going to be helpful for anybody. Yeah.
So as people are doing therapy with their therapists, when it comes to multiple relationships, what are some things you think they should look out for, like red flags?
Yes.
Basically.
Well, I think first of all, you need to make sure that the mental health professional, somebody that you're going to see or plan to see, isn't somebody you already have a relationship with.
Right.
A lot of our clients refer their friends and family to see us, and that's the biggest compliment we can get. That's not necessarily a multiple relationship, but you don't want it to be, oh, my neighbor's a psychotherapist, my neighbor's a counselor, I can just go see them.
Right.
You already have an existing relationship. That's one thing you should just, in general, start out. It should be somebody that you don't have ties with.
Right. On that note, it's very normal for you to for people to reach out to the therapist
Sure.
they know, because it just makes sense. I know
Sure.
this person knows me, they might be able to help me. You don't quite understand how it would change the relationship for you to be a client of theirs, and the vulnerability that
Right.
is beyond, kind of crosses a line there. So the thing I would tell you is try not to be hurt or offended if they tell you they can't see you or they need to refer you to somebody else. That's actually them caring for you. So like if you have a wedding that you want your therapist to be at because they're meaningful to you, the therapy is meaningful, or maybe even a funeral, they might not even go to those. And try not to be hurt by that. That's actually them protecting you and caring about your well-being and what you've worked so hard for in therapy. And this therapist in The Shrink Next Door completely exploited that and made it seem like this was a normal thing for therapists to do in caring for their client,
Right.
which really boiled down to the therapist not dealing with his own issues.
Absolutely.
So marriage and family therapists, this is the 3.9 code in the AAMFT Code of Ethics. Marriage and family therapists attend to cultural norms when considering whether to accept gifts from or give gifts to clients. Marriage and family therapists consider the potential effects that receiving or giving gifts may have on clients and on the integrity and efficacy of the therapeutic relationship. And then, of course, I put the kind of the general clause that actually comes right before gifts, which I think is interesting.
I
right?
know, yeah.
Right? And so 3.8 is just a kind of a general statement that says, don't exploit your clients, basically. And then it goes into the gift giving. So there is some vagueness on this.
Sure.
Like it's really left up to each individual therapist to decide, what's appropriate,
You have
what's
to, like they
not.
say, consider the potential effects.
Right.
Right, and that's putting some faith and trust in a therapist to have the therapeutic skill and judgment
Yeah.
to assess that. There used to be talk of like a dollar amount that was okay to accept and a dollar amount that wasn't. That's gone away, and it's really just more about your judgment about how it could impact the relationship.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and what's disturbing about this show is that, again, spoiler alert here, is that, knowing that it spanned over a good part of 3 decades, this exploitive relationship, is that he gave gifts in the amount of millions to this therapist. It's highly exploitive and criminal at that point.
Yes, absolutely. Sure.
So, kind of going back to what we said earlier is like if we've accepted gifts from time
Sure.
to time because there's when people are reaching out to you in that way and expressing their appreciation, you kind of got to gauge, like, to not accept a gift sometimes might be harmful to the
Right.
therapeutic relationship.
Right.
And that's why it says you have to consider the potential effects of giving gifts that giving gifts may have on the efficacy of therapy.
Sure.
And I think we do a good job of that
I think
here.
so too.
But that we have been offered pretty elaborate gifts
Sure.
that we've had to turn down or
Yes.
give back.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And try to make that a therapeutic experience too, to
Sure.
say what is this, what are you communicating by this, and to talk that through, and then to set the limits, again reflecting the boundaries of our relationship with our clients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if your therapist happens to have pretty solid boundaries and they won't even accept a greeting card from you, then just try to remember they're protecting the relationship. That's more important to them than warm fuzzies that come from
That's right.
the gift that you're giving them.
Right.
So,
Right. These next two, well, the first one we're going to talk about is jumping out at you watching that clip, and if you watch, or if you were courageous enough to finish the series, you're going to see it. This is about the abuse of the therapeutic relationship. And it says marriage and family therapists do not abuse their power in the therapeutic relationship. And you can obviously see even in that clip how quickly Paul Rudd's character turned it around from how dare you challenge me, and don't you see that what I'm doing is just about caring for you. So you can see the hierarchy in that relationship already, that he knows best for Will Ferrell's character, and so Will Ferrell's character should just trust his perception of it, and that's an absolute exploitation and abuse of the power in that relationship.
right. And then this next part is really important, and I want to spend some time on this one, where it talks about the autonomy of decision making. So this is kind of where we can. The power differential that happens, when you're in a hierarchical relationship, and that's kind of what a therapist-client relationship is, that, our clients are looking to us as the person kind of in authority, even though they're not thinking of it that way. It's kind of how it feels. Like, I'm at a loss for what to do. You're a professional. You're an
trained.
expert. Right. Tell me what to do, Josh. Tell me what to do, Carrie. And as you can see in our ethical code, we have to be very careful in respecting the rights of clients to make their own decisions. We help them weigh consequences. There are many times that I'm talking to clients about kind of what if scenarios. What if you did this, or what if you did that?
Right.
And I can see sometimes might even be in a trance-like state, almost like I'm telling them what to do. And when I catch that, I am very careful or very intentional about saying, I'm not telling you to do anything. Like, I want you to consider just what if you did that, what might happen if you did that.
Sure.
You have to make the decision for yourself.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're not ready to do things like that. Or sometimes it's not a good thing to do. We're exploring options here.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that's I think that speaks to the vulnerability that a lot of our clients feel in when they come to therapy.
Yeah.
They're at a time in their life when they're struggling, and they may be having trouble getting through the day, and so they want to know what to do, and they're seeking out advice and guidance and support and wanting someone to help them work it through. And because they're so vulnerable, that they can probably put too much weight in if they felt like a therapist was giving a directive. And it's really important to help your clients work through and make their own decisions, right? You're not doing a good job as a therapist if you make your clients more reliant on you.
Right.
That's the opposite of the goals. And as you can probably see even in the few episodes that I watched, Will Ferrell's character got more dependent on the therapist. For things obviously outside the scope of therapy. And that's exactly the wrong direction to be going in.
There have been times, I'm sure this happened with you too, with most therapists, where we'll have a session with a client. The client will leave for the week. They'll come back and they'll say, "I did what you told me to do. I did." So hold on a minute.
Right.
I don't I'm usually very careful about not telling people to do things, and so sometimes even in our carefulness of helping them weigh out decisions, they're still hearing it as like Josh said to do this, Carrie said to do this. you know, and most of the time that's not the case. Now there are some directives like where we say like, I think this would be a good book for you to read. You should get this book.
Sure.
And read it,
I mean, there are directives like improve your sleep quality and exercise and
it's
those
very
things.
science proven
Sure.
stuff. Yeah.
Sure.
But when it comes to like you should get a divorce.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
Or you should stay married.
Right.
Those aren't things that we say. In this series, and this is anything I'm revealing that you can't get from the preview, the therapist has told him to disconnect from his sister, and that's a directive or a relational directive of you need to do this, and if you're in a situation with a therapist and they're telling you things like, I think you should get a divorce, I think you should cut your parents off, cut your parents out, or things like that, then that's a big red flag. Now there is a caveat to that, though.
Sure,
like if there's a safety issue,
right?
But they're not going to tell you to get a divorce.
They're going to tell you to get safe.
To get safe, right? You need to get to a safe place.
I'm concerned you're unsafe.
Right.
I'm concerned this relationship is, obviously negatively impacting your health and your risks, et cetera. I think it explicitly says in here, we support your client's responsibility to make their own decisions about cohabitation, marriage, divorce, separation, reconciliation, custody, and visitation.
Right.
And we are very careful about that. I also think that part of what was so emotionally disturbing to me to watch this series was because Paul Rudd's character made these decisions or recommendations so recklessly.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would ever want that kind of power.
Yeah.
I don't want that. I don't want that kind of power over anybody but
absolutely.
myself. And so I think that's also why it was so unfortunate. And I think our training as marriage and family therapists was drilled into our head about what our roles and responsibility was about making life decisions.
Absolutely. It's something that was really disturbing to me on that clip that we just watched is that he, like I said, Paul Rudd, the actor, was probably, my guess is, had some training on how to do this, because there was some things, the way he approached him with concern and compassion, those are very healing
experiences.
techniques and experiences for clients to have with their therapist. But then what he did is that he offered some healing, and then he rips the scab off by saying, you don't want this to happen to you. You don't want this. You don't, why would you do this or that, and it's almost like a parent shaming a child.
Right.
Why would you want to hurt mommy and daddy? And so he just rips that scab off, and so he keeps the trauma wound open.
Yeah.
And then offers them a painkiller.
And then takes it back.
But then it rips the scab off, creates, and it keeps that going for years and for years and for years, and it truly is sinister, and frankly, it's sociopathic.
Yes, I think so.
Right.
I know. Well, on that happy note.
So our goal was to convince you to not let the tone of that show
dissuade you
to all therapists. I don't know if we.
I don't know if we did it right. I don't know. Right.
But I think it is important to recognize. I would not dissuade anybody from watching it.
Sure,
I think you should go watch it. It's a really good series. There was a podcast first. I have not listened to the podcast. If you don't think Will Ferrell can portray a serious role, then he did a fantastic job in it. But also recognize too that there are some things that you can do to be aware, and kind of trust in your gut that something doesn't feel right. And you see that coming from his sister throughout the series. This is started out in the 80s, and she's like, that's kind of unconventional, isn't it? And I'm not even, I think we're somewhat unconventional therapists in how we do our practice, and the team approach that we do and things like that. That's not, we're not necessarily what I would call a cookie cutter practice where it's just week to week therapy. There is a lot of that we do, but there's a lot of different things that we're able to do because of how we're set up But you know, if your therapist starts feeling more like a friend that you're gonna, you know, you guys are gonna go have beers with, and I'm not saying I haven't had those temptations. Like there are a lot of clients I've worked with that I felt like in different circumstances could have been good friends. But it's important for the therapist to have those boundaries that,
Yep.
you know, we can be friendly in here, and we can even cut up sometimes and laugh
Sure.
and even catch up on each other's lives to some degree. But the relationship that we have, though, is therapist-client.
And the boundaries have to be clear and
Absolutely.
consistent. Absolutely.
We appreciate you guys watching. Feel free again to comment. Go check us out on our other social media platforms like Instagram, and we just started a TikTok. Do you know the URL for that one? Oh yeah, it's tiktok.com/@FS_counseling, I believe. And then, but we also go find us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, and then we'll see you back here in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks.